mustache has been indicted. The return of no kings. Zelensky returns to the White House. And the debate over no enemies to the right. All that and much more on today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. But first, the breaking news of the day. John Bolton, President Trump's former national security advisor. He was there during the first term, unceremoniously booted from the Trump White House. A grand jury in Maryland, in suburban Washington, D.C., indicting John Bolton on 18 counts, a whopping 18 counts of retaining and transmitting sensitive national security information. Prosecutors asserting that John Bolton, quote, kept more than 1,000 pages of information about his day-to-day activities, allegedly including sensitive information that he allegedly shared with multiple people who were unauthorized. John Bolton pushing back, saying that this was all due to his criticism of Donald Trump since leaving office. Now, a few things can be true here at once, as is often the case when it comes to legal matters. On the one hand, we should never forget the old legal axiom, something that we certainly learned during law school that I think continues to be true to this day. And many times, the grand jury, as you've likely heard, would indict a ham sandwich. This is an old saying from lawyers going back decades, maybe even hundreds of years since the advent, perhaps, of the grand jury back in English common law. The percentage of prosecutors who are able to get an indictment upon bringing forth charges to a grand jury is really quite high, especially when you have a high-profile prosecution of this nature. So on the one hand, always be a little bit skeptical. On the other hand, for whatever it's worth, I typically choose not to traffic in rumor mongering, in anecdotal information. You hear, I've heard this, some source said this here, but for whatever it may be worth, based on my legal background, all the lawyers that I know who live in and around Washington, D.C., the folks who I knew from the first Trump White House in some respect as well, I've heard from a lot of folks over the years. There was a lot of anecdotal evidence, if you will, or a lot of anecdotal suggestions that John Bolton has indeed been doing exactly this. That he was indeed holding a lot of sensitive national security information, a lot of confidential, classified information that he should not have been retaining at all, let alone retaining and then transmitting to people who had no responsibility to view it. We'll see how it goes. These indictments are always a lot easier to bring, more generally speaking, than nabbing the actual conviction. That's true for John Bolton. That's true for James Comey. That's true for Tish James. It's really true for any of these cases there. But for whatever it's worth, it really does seem to me, based on my assessment of John Bolton and what he's about, that he really did seek to exploit information to undermine the Trump presidency. John Bolton is someone who was hired by President Trump, and they clashed very, very quickly. John Bolton has famously hawkish views when it comes to foreign policy. He's also kind of a throwback to a different era. In many ways, he is kind of a Reagan-era Republican. Donald Trump is anything but a Reagan-era Republican. He is a new breed of leader, a new breed of commander-in-chief. And even holding foreign policy aside, and they're very different foreign policy agendas and worldviews, there was just a bit of a personality mishmash here. Now, for what it's worth, Donald Trump saying, according to a White House pool report just yesterday on Thursday, that he actually didn't even know about this indictment until it came across his desk. Go ahead and watch this clip.
President John Bolton was just indicted by a grand jury in Maryland. Do you have a reaction to that?
I didn't know that. You told me for the first time, but I think he's, a bad person. I think he's a bad guy. Yeah, he's a bad guy. It's too bad, but that's the way it goes.
The case against him?
That's the way it goes, right? That's the way it goes. Will I what?
Have you reviewed the case against him?
No, I haven't. But I just think he's a bad person.
All right, so again, to stick to our theme here early in the show, multiple things true at once. It's entirely possible that Donald Trump has not actually reviewed the indictment against John Bolton. I mean, the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, frankly, probably has bigger matters to handle than a specific indictment against a specific former disgruntled employee from his first term. He's probably focused, I would like to think, when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine potential peace deal, when it comes to deterring communist China and various threats against the United States, when it comes to the narco-terrorists from Venezuela and the Caribbean on the boats and up through Mexico into the homeland and on and on and on. So that is probably true. On the other hand, he is the head of the DOJ ultimately, even above the Attorney General, and he really does have the final sign-off if his sign-off is sought, which doesn't have to be, but if his sign-off is sought, then it ultimately really is required in a situation like this. For what it's worth, John Bolton, for his matter, again, talk about a dude who has not been a fan of the President of the United States very, very publicly as a matter of vocal public record. Here was John Bolton a couple of years ago during the throes of the Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, Jack Smith Democrat lawfare complex. Here was John Bolton actively calling for the prosecution of his former boss, President Trump.
You know, Republicans used to believe that not prosecuting criminals led to more crime. The answer here is take the politics out of the decision, and in this case, proceed with the prosecution and do the same for anybody else who does anything even remotely like it. Just read the indictment and ask yourself, if the government can prove what they allege here, shouldn't this man go to jail? The simple fact he had the documents for any reason or no reason should subject him to prosecution.
John Bolton there on CNN in 2023 during the very throes of the Jack Smith legal crusade. That was in the aftermath of the first Jack Smith indictment that was filed against Donald Trump for the whole classified documents Mar-a-Lago debate there in June of 2023. So John Bolton, someone who has not been mincing words when it comes to his criticisms of Donald Trump. Does that mean that he should be prosecuted? No, of course not. Of course, that sheer fact alone does not mean that John Bolton should be prosecuted. Rather, I am telling you that, again, I don't pretend to know what the prosecutors here know. I don't work in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland. I have not seen the documents there. I have not seen what they have seen that has led them to pursue an indictment with the grand jury. I'm just telling you, again, based on what I've heard for many, many years now, including, frankly, some ideological friends in the broader right-of-center space who really do have some genuinely old-school, hawkish, dare I even say, neoconservative trending views on foreign policy. A lot of even those folks have suggested to me that it really is entirely possible that John Bolton could be guilty of this, that there's a case to be made that he has been transmitting and sharing classified confidential information, that he simply should not be in the business of doing that. More generally speaking, and zooming out a little bit here, here's where the conversation gets a little more interesting. We've now had a succession, a series of high-profile indictments. And, the media, the New York Times, Washington Post, they're going to emote and they're going to say that, oh, these are all just a list of Donald Trump's political enemies. I'm not going to use that sort of hyperbolic verbiage, but I will say that there now are a series of folks who have been very critical and certainly do not agree with President Trump and his political agenda and his public policy priorities, who have now been indicted. You're looking at Tish James, the active sitting Attorney General of New York State, who has been indicted when it comes to financial fraud allegations. And you're looking at Jim Comey, the former FBI director, who has been indicted when it comes to possibly perjuring himself before Congress, that coming in just within the 5-year statute of limitations when it comes to a federal perjury charge for testimony that took place in Congress about 4 years ago, give or take. And now you have this shoe to drop when it comes to Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton. Now, you certainly have folks on the left who are not particularly happy about this situation. You have plenty of folks on the left who are saying, oh my God, Donald Trump's a dictator, or he's prosecuting his political enemies. This is just the modern reincarnation of Carl Schmitt, the infamous 20th century German political philosopher who spoke about punishing one's enemies and rewarding one's friends. And look, is there a small point to be made there? Sure, there is a small point to be made insofar as you have a lot of folks, as I said, who have been very critical of President Trump, who are now facing indictments. But two things to be said on this. One is, as Americans, we assess every case on its own merits. Every single case has to be assessed on its own merits. We have a legal system for a reason. The threshold for getting an indictment, as the old joke about the ham sandwich indicates, the legal threshold is not particularly high. The legal threshold for finding someone guilty of a crime in our system is considerably higher, beyond a reasonable doubt. That is a much, much, much tougher threshold. So many of these cases that are brought at the indictment stage, as folks like Jack Smith Merrick Garland's former prosecutorial lawfare henchman, as he learned the hard way. So many of these cases end up fizzling out way before a jury, way before a conviction, way before anything like that. The more interesting point is this, and the longtime listeners of our show will be very familiar with what I'm about to say. To our newer audience, thanks to our partnership with Salem Media Group, hear me out here. One of my favorite lines in a situation like this is that the only way out is through. There are so many folks, so many controlled opposition, right liberal types, who will look at the state of the Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, Jack Smith DOJ, and they will say, oh, the left is just going after their political opponents. Okay, fine. I mean, they're going after Donald Trump. Okay, fine. They're going after the pro-life grandmothers, charging them with absurd FACE Act prosecutions for praying outside of abortion clinics. Okay, fine. They're going after Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro. Okay, fine. But when it comes time to their response, what did they suggest? Oh, yeah, we're going to take the moral high ground. We're just going to go stand on the neutral, equal rule of law. Well, query, frankly, to an extent, whether or not those halcyon days of a truly, completely apolitical rule of law enforcement regime, query whether that actually existed. I'm not here to be overly cynical. I am just suggesting that since time immemorial, certainly since the advent of the Justice Department and the very first Attorney General of the United States and the modern federal justice system in this country, there has always been such thing as prosecutorial resources and prosecutorial discretion. No Justice Department, no police department, no legal or criminal justice regime anywhere has the wherewithal, has the means, the resources, the time, the manpower, and so forth to bring every single case at every single time. So to an extent, some sort of prioritizing, of triage, of hierarchically ranking which cases to bring in which context, at which time, etc. All of that is very much baked into the equation. The final thing I'll say on this is this, though. Folks, when you're dealing with a bully, and the Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, Jack Smith DOJ, they were nothing if not bullies. Prosecuting the former president and now current president, 45/47, Donald Trump, prosecuting him on risible charges in numerous jurisdictions. The absurd invocation of the Espionage Act, a dusty Woodrow Wilson World War I era statute when it came to the classified documents case at Mar-a-Lago. The equally risible prosecution in Washington, D.C. over January 6th. Is the way really to deal with that sort of thing to simply say, oh, I'm not getting involved here. I'm just going to take a completely apolitical approach. You know, the law is the law, the law is the law. Is that how you treat a bully? You know, for the parents there, is that when your kid is getting bullied on the playground, is the bully deterred by simply wagging your big finger and saying, slink back to the corner whence you came? No. The bully is deterred when there is actual deterrence. When the bully's nose, proverbially speaking, not literally, is bloodied up a little bit. You have to throw some punches back. As my good friend Abigail Schreier put it in an essay a couple of years ago, where the pendulum is so far off kilter like this, sometimes you have to punch back a little bit and escalate things in the short to midterm in order to reach a long-term equilibrium. It's not my preference that is where we're at in these United States. I clerked in the Federal Court of Appeals. I'm a rule of law guy, a Constitution guy. That's what this show's about. But it's basic game theory, folks. When you're dealing with an actor like this, the actor must be deterred. And that partially is the prism through which I assess all these indictments. But again, case by case, we will see where it goes ultimately with John Bolton. But for now, the mustache, John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, indicted on 18 counts by a federal grand jury in Maryland. We are certainly paying very close attention to that. In other news, this weekend marks the return of No Kings, and you would be forgiven for not knowing what the heck No Kings is. So they had these first batch of rallies from earlier this year on June 14th, so a few months ago, just as the summer was getting started. Basically just a series of grassroots demonstrations, I guess would be a very polite way of saying it. Bunch of looters and rioters. These are the folks that I typically refer to as the shock troop wing of the Democratic Party, the Black Lives Matter, the Antifa crowd. The folks who are there to really put on the ground pressure, to basically try to take the extremely hostile, aggressive rhetoric from the Democratic Party elected class, from Beltway liberal elites, the kind of rhetoric that is typically referring to folks who think like me and think like you, that kind of rhetoric calling us fascists, Nazis, and all sorts of horrible names. The shock troop wing then implements that. Now, taken to its logical conclusion, that can get really violent, but at a bare minimum, they're implementing it with all sorts of these insane rallies. Again, you'd be forgiven if you missed when this happened the first time back in June, so about 4 months ago. I barely noticed it myself. There was so much going on at that time. There were the anti-ICE riots out in Los Angeles. There was the build-up to the U.S. involvement in the Israel-Iran war. There was a lot going on back then, but for whatever it's worth, No Kings is returning this weekend, Saturday, October 18th, in a city near you, as the case may be. Now, one of the questions that always gets raised in a situation like this is who is funding this? I mean, who in the world is funding a bunch of hooligans to just get out there on a Saturday, as if you don't have anything better to do? As if literally just go sit on your couch, go sit on your couch and go watch college football. Go watch Alabama, Texas, Notre Dame. I mean, that would be a better use of your time than this. But, many things would be a better use of your time than this. Many things. How about you took the 2 to 3 hours of your life that you were dedicating to go call Donald Trump a dictator or an authoritarian or a king, which he's not. Take that time and go, volunteer in your community. Go volunteer for your church or synagogue. Go to the local soup kitchen. Go to the local community center, Rotary Club. Go to the gym. Take control of your life. These are the basic things that you really, really ought to be doing more than this. But anyway, I suspect if you're considering going to a No Kings rally this weekend, you're probably not watching this particular show. But again, as I was saying, one of the debates and the questions that are always raised in this context is who is funding this. Well, Ted Cruz, senator from Texas, was on Fox News talking about how there is considerable evidence that George Soros is underwriting some of this. Go ahead and watch.
You look at this No Kings rally, and there's considerable evidence that George Soros and his network is behind funding these rallies, which may well be riots all across the country, and Soros is writing the check. And so I've introduced legislation called the Stop Funders Act that would add rioting to the list of predicate offenses for RICO. Why is that? Because it would let the Department of Justice use RICO, racketeering, to prosecute the money that is funding the anti-Semitic protests on campuses, the pro-open border protest in L.A. and other cities, and these No King protests. Anyone that is supporting rioting and violence, it lets you go after the money.
Look, this would be the least surprising thing in the world to me. George Soros underwriting the No Kings, the Tides Foundation, all sorts of other left-wing actors that are typically involved when it comes to underwriting a lot of this madness. Simply put, Donald Trump is not a king. Donald Trump is not an authoritarian. He is trying to override and to litigate against and overturn a lot of flawed, especially FDR 1930s New Deal era legal precedent that had the effect of diluting and undermining presidential power, of legitimizing a lot of these so-called independent agencies, of making the chief executive anything other than a chief executive, as someone who can actually engage in the personnel decisions, in the hiring and firing that are the sine qua non, the core power of the chief executive. You want to think about what a king was? I think back to Barack Obama's infamous comment about "give me a pen and give me a phone." That's my way of bypassing Congress. That's a king. Joe Biden prosecuting his top political opponent, Donald Trump. That's a king. Donald Trump for trying to restore the rule of law. That's not a king. That's a constitutionalist. These people really, really should try to take control of their lives and make it more meaningful. I don't have particularly high hopes for it. But they are ultimately, as the wise man once said, shouting in vain, signifying nothing. Vladimir Zelensky also at the White House today on Friday, October 17th. Vladimir Zelensky meeting with Donald Trump as part of the continued back and forth as to whether or not there could be an off-ramp, a peace deal in the Eastern European theater between Russia and Ukraine. Donald Trump also announcing yesterday that he is planning on meeting with Vladimir Putin in Budapest, Hungary, at some point over the next couple of weeks. The exact time of that meeting is to be determined. I saw Prime Minister Viktor Orban, the head of Hungary, tweeting about it on social media. So that meeting looks like it is going to happen. By the way, as an aside, I'm sure the European Union is going to flip out of that because the Hungarian government all too often gets accused of being pro-Russia. They are not pro-Russia. They are just realpolitik realists there. What's going to happen there when it comes to the latest with Zelensky and Putin? Frankly, it's a little hard to be optimistic. If nothing happened after the most recent meetings, Donald Trump had that big meeting 2 months ago in mid-August with Vladimir Putin at the military base in Alaska. They had the B-2 bomber fly over, and Donald Trump kind of pulled in Putin's hand for this ultra machismo-style masculine handshake, sending a message that would be impossible to miss. If nothing happened after that, and then nothing happened after that star-studded meeting at the White House the very next business day. So the Putin meeting was in Alaska on Friday. Then, if you recall, literally the following Monday, so I believe it was August 18th, you had Giorgia Meloni there, you had Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, a lot of the top European leaders were there with Zelensky himself. If nothing happened after that, then, I mean, who am I to pretend to be optimistic about what could possibly happen here when it comes to this latest meeting between Zelensky and Trump, and with Putin and Trump meeting in Budapest over the next couple of weeks? I would love to be proven wrong. This war has gone on for far, far too long now. Really, it's been 3.5. I mean, this February will mark 4 years. 4 years since Vladimir Putin decided to send in the tanks across the Donbass into eastern Ukraine. Donald Trump is correct to shift his center of priority of focus from Zelensky, who he was previously pressuring, to Putin. Putin, it seems to me, to be clearly the more intransigent, obstinate actor at this particular point. That was not always the case. I did think that Zelensky was the actor who had to be reasoned with for a period of time. But whatever Zelensky's flaws were a year and a half, 2 years ago, at this point, Putin really is the issue there. We'll see what happens with Trump's meeting with Putin in Budapest. The very broad outlines of some sort of off-ramp to that particular deal seem to me to be not particularly controversial. I think everyone agrees on what the broad outlines of that deal are going to be. The question really is, how do you actually get it done? And look, Donald Trump is the king deal maker. Coming off of this ceasefire hostage deal between Israel and Hamas, he's achieved ceasefire deals, of course, between Armenia and Azerbaijan, an incredibly bitter conflict. I was there in Armenia 2 years ago, saw it firsthand. So he achieved a ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan, between India and Pakistan, two nuclear powers, between Thailand and Cambodia in Southeastern Asia, the bitter tribal conflict between Rwanda and Congo in sub-Saharan Africa. He's the peacemaker. He's the deal maker. Is one more peace deal here genuinely in the offing in the near to mid-future? I don't know. I would love the answer to be yes. I just don't know. Frankly, as I said, it's kind of hard given what has recently happened, or more accurately, not happened. It's kind of hard to be optimistic about that. Another thing that's happening that I want to spend a good amount of time on today's show. There has been an explosion of this debate over the nature of what it means to be on the right and the nature of the extent to which we can keep a unified front. What does it mean? I mean, we're not going to do the whole exactly kind of first principles 101. What does it mean to be a conservative here? But there has been a lot of chatter, especially in the aftermath of the horrific assassination of my friend Charlie Kirk a little over a month ago. There has been a prolonged effort to debate getting along within the confines of the broader right. I'm thinking in many ways of my friend and former colleague, Matt Walsh. So I worked at the Daily Wire years ago. I used to edit Matt Walsh's opinion column main days. Matt Walsh, former guest here on the Josh Hammer Show. Long time, big fan of Matt Walsh, who is brilliant. I'm thinking of a couple of Matt Walsh's tweets in particular. So on September 10th, This was just a few hours, actually, after Charlie Kirk's assassination. Matt Walsh tweets, "The entire right has to band together. Enough of this infighting BS. We are up against demonic forces from the pit of hell. They're killing us in our churches. They tried to kill our president. They killed Charlie, one of our greatest advocates. Put the personal squabbles aside. Now's not the time. This is existential. A fight for our own existence and the existence of our country." And then just earlier this week, October 14th, Matt Walsh tweeting again, "The right doesn't stick together. That's our biggest problem by far. Conservatives are quick to denounce each other, jump on dog piles, disavow, attack their allies. I said a few weeks ago that we all need to band together in the wake of Charlie's death, and the answer I got back from a lot of people on the right was basically no. Well, okay then, guys. We'll just lose instead. The left will keep up the united front and defend their guys no matter what, while we keep throwing each other to the wolves at every opportunity. Great plan." There's a lot to be said on this, and I have a lot of thoughts. I would prefer nothing more than to focus all of my attention, to hone in all of my ire, my criticisms on the left. I've been on the right my entire life. We discussed this on yesterday's show. I have been an opponent of leftism, Marxism, globalism, all these horrific ideologies for my entire life. And the left is indeed leftism, neo-Marxism of various stripes, wokeism, identity politics, softer forms of tyranny such as universalism and globalism, the likes of which are embodied by the World Economic Forum, the UN. All these ideologies are toxic and ultimately destructive to the nation state itself, let alone a nation state founded, as ours is, on rule of law, biblical values. I would love nothing more than to focus on that. The problem is that it doesn't seem to me that everyone on our broader side, on the right, shares that passion. Even some folks who purport to put differences aside seemingly can't do so for all that long. Shortly after Charlie was murdered, Ben Shapiro, I think this was when Ben was filling in on the Charlie Kirk show, publicly admitted something that he had privately told me, which is that Tucker Carlson had reached out to Ben after Charlie's horrific assassination and said, "We agree on most of the issues. Let's just, let bygones be bygones. Focus on the shared enemy, the left." To which I believe Ben responded, "Great, awesome, let's do it." But it was just a couple of days later that Tucker Carlson was yet again fanning the flames of openly speculating that Israel was somehow involved in the murder of Charlie Kirk. This so-called truce, the same truce that Matt Walsh is correctly trying to get at, lasted just a handful of days at that. More generally speaking, is there a truce to be had with some of the individuals who I presume that Matt and people like Matt have in mind? Is there a truce to be had between myself and Candace Owens while she is ludicrously, insanely accusing me of somehow having foreknowledge in the assassination of my friend Charlie Kirk? Really? How in the world is that going to work? You have a lot of folks these days, seemingly, whose number one goal, even if they are on the purported so-called right, their number one goal is tearing down the right. They want nothing more than to destroy MAGA and to supplant it with their own nefarious political movement. In many ways, for certain individuals at least, I suspect this actually really is the goal. I've had this thought for a long time. After all, why would Tucker Carlson have on his show 2 months before the 2024 presidential election? Why would Tucker Carlson have on his show Daryl Cooper to fan the flames of outright Holocaust revisionism? To say that the Nazis actually did not intend to exterminate millions of people. They just found themselves in camps and didn't really know what to do with them. If you actually are hoping for your side's success, why would you do something like that 2 months beforehand? Have any of these folks more generally, have they been applauding Donald Trump this week? Have they been giving President Trump credit when it comes to the ceasefire hostage deal? They've been awfully quiet, haven't they? Frankly, a lot of these folks look and talk and sound a lot like the AOC Jasmine Crockett wing. The folks who were calling for a ceasefire for the past 2 years, frankly, while the blood was still drying on October 8th, 2023, calling for a ceasefire, now a ceasefire has been achieved, and they're dead silent all of a sudden. Curious how that works. It is imperative that the right prevails in America's roiling cold civil war. I am earnestly of the opinion that the United States truly, earnestly is the last great hope for Western civilization. In order for the United States to be saved, something that we do our very own small part to do each and every day in our show, if the United States is to be saved, the American right, the conservative flank, must be saved. And that conservative flank, the American right, must know what it stands for. It must be grounded in the teachings and principles that conservatives have stood for since time immemorial. For the ecumenical biblical inheritance without which none of this exists. Equal moral human worth. Rule of law. The ever delicate balancing act between individual liberty and the general welfare, the common good. Certainly within any coalition, you're going to have folks who are going to disagree on any topics. You will have folks who will disagree over what the tax rate should be on certain levels of the tax income bracket. You'll have folks who will disagree when it comes to the size of the child tax credit, when it comes to the number of legal immigrants and the type of legal immigrants we should let into the show. You'll have folks who will disagree when it comes perhaps even to some sensitive cultural issues, such as exactly where to draw the line when it comes to the abortion debate. Personally, I'm a life begins at conception kind of guy. But one thing that you definitely cannot have within a political movement, and that movement is still going to be a movement in the sense of the term movement, is you can't have people that are monolithically obsessed with trying to kick others out of the movement. If Candace Owens really does not want Jews to be part of the American right, if someone like Kurt Mills, the executive director of the magazine that laughably calls itself The American Conservative, as he was overheard talking about at a conference in Washington, D.C. a month and a half ago, talking about how his number one goal in the second Trump term is to divorce evangelical Protestants from the Jews and from Israel. Does that sound like the kind of individual who is interested in retaining the MAGA coalition, who is interested in focusing and training his sights on the left? It does not. So I really appreciate what Matt Walsh has said here. The entire right has to band together, how this is one of our problems, that the right doesn't stick together. But you really do have to clean your own house. One of the reasons that the left has gone so far down the rabbit hole is that they have failed to do exactly that. They have failed to clean their own house. They have let the crazies take over the movement. There's a movement that, far from soberly learning the lessons of the 2024 election, has shut down the federal government due to taxpayer subsidization of illegal alien health care. This is a movement that's about to elect Zoran Mamdani, the very personification, the singular embodiment of the nefarious red-green alliance between Marxism and Islamism. This is a movement that is allowing him to become the mayor, God forbid, but likely going to happen, of the most important city in America. This is one of the reasons that the Democratic Party and political leftism in general are not faring well right now in these United States. The right has to patrol its own henhouse. It has to make sure that the crazies do not take over the asylum. That, in many ways, is what I'm seeing here when it comes to this concerned discussion on the right. So no, I do not agree with the notion that there are no enemies to the right. Nick Fuentes, the Groypers, these folks are not just enemies of me. They are enemies of the United States. And therefore, they should be your enemies as well. Folks, if you've been a longtime listener to the Josh Hammer Show, you likely are familiar with our typical Friday segment, Hammer Time. But for those who are just now following along due to our brand new exciting partnership with Salem Media Group and watching perhaps on YouTube, Hammer Time is a weekly segment where we kind of go rapid fire through some of the woke headlines of the week. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in here on Hammer Time. We begin with an article over at Business Insider. So there's a leaked Disney email about a new employee event series that shows that Disney's reworked approach to DEI, well, it's still pretty gung-ho on DEI. So Disney is having its first ever Global Belonging Week for employees, which will run from August 20th to 24th, include a series of live stream talks that are, quote, designed to empower and inspire. Now, the itinerary, which was obtained from Disney staffers, references belonging and inclusion. So they're basically just doing the whole DEI shtick without actually doing the DEI shtick. So they're actually literally not using the phrase diversity, equity, or DEI, but they're talking about essentially the exact same concepts using slightly different thesaurus.com style language there. I mean, how dumb to an extent do these companies think that they are? Look, I live in the state of Florida. The Walt Disney Company has had a very contentious relationship with Governor Ron DeSantis, with the state of Florida in recent years. Governor DeSantis has generally won that battle in every way that a governor, that a politician, that a state can win a battle over a private corporation in that state. But generally speaking, just putting out my private investment cap, to kind of get back to our message earlier on the show about the only way out is through. If you are an investor and you see a headline like this when it comes to Disney just trying to do the whole DEI thing in any other language there, maybe consider selling your shares, maybe consider not investing in Disney in the first place. Certainly, I think that would be well warranted at this particular point. Harvard is charging $13,000 for DEI certificates on bias and privilege. This from FoxNews.com. So this is a new certificate program that certifies you in DEI. By the way, speaking of Matt Walsh, I see this. I cannot help but think of Matt Walsh's DEI film for the Daily Wire, which is amazing. And you should totally check it out. So going back to Harvard, so this new DEI certificate program is promising to teach students about how to identify bias and, quote, create a plan for addressing a real-world organizational challenge. And the cost of that certificate? Nearly $14,000 a pop. So it's offered by Harvard's Division of Continuing Education and is trying to empower them to be a powerful voice for strategic change within your own organization on the outside. You literally might as well take your money and, use it to light a nice cigar. Take it, drain it down the toilet. What are these people hoping to achieve? You're literally paying to get a moral imprimatur of legitimacy from folks within your own niche political movement on the left. You're essentially doing this, in other words, for the plaudits. You're doing it to get pat on the back. You're doing this because you want to be praised by the goody two-shoes folks, because you want to be praised by the diversity consultants. You want to be praised by all the liberals at your local community organization there, or the folks at your parental meeting. Totally nuts stuff. This is exactly the kind of stuff, by the way, that the Trump administration should be even further cracking down on. I mean, to be clear, the Trump administration has already gone to legal war against Harvard, but Harvard cannot discriminate against white people, Christians, Asians, Jews, Mormons, etc. They cannot discriminate even if they use different language. It doesn't matter if the literal word DEI is used. You cannot discriminate as a matter of Title VI when it comes to taxpayer-subsidized institutions. So make sure that Harvard is not doing that in other wiggly, lawyerly language, certainly when it comes to this particular case as well. But at a bare minimum, you should probably think twice before literally throwing your money away down the particular toilet. Finally, billionaire Mackenzie Scott is doubling down on DEI with a $42 million donation. So it's a massive $42 million donation from Mackenzie Scott to an organization called 10,000 Degrees. This is a nonprofit based out in the San Francisco Bay Area, focused on expanding college access for low-income and largely non-white students. She's given all sorts of money in recent years to a group called Native Forward, which is a scholarship provider for American Indians, and so forth. There, look, I don't know a ton about Mackenzie Scott on a personal level there, but I mean, think about all the good use that those $42 million could be used towards, right? I'm thinking about all the ways that $42 million could actually be used to try to provide people meals who are homeless, to try to provide people shelters who are homeless, to try to actually reach out to people when it comes to trying to fill their lives with meaning, like actual meaning, not fake meaning, not fake DEI woke meaning, like real, actual, godly, biblical meaning. The amount of money that could be spent to try to get these folks into church pews on Sunday. I mean, there are so many ways. The No Kings garbage this weekend, there are so many ways that these liberals' money, their attention span, their efforts could be used for the better. I mean, the mind really just reels in thinking about that there. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons why I just look at this and I don't just shrug my shoulders, but in some ways, I'm actually angry. In some ways, I actually get righteously indignant when I see headlines like this, because this is a lot of money and is money that is ultimately going not just towards not good, but ultimately towards destructive purposes as well. Thank you as always for tuning in to the Josh Hammer Show, folks. Make sure to like and subscribe if you've not done so already. Hope you have an amazing weekend, and we will see you right back here on Monday.